Now I'd like to invite to the podium Professor Junichi Akashi, Associate Professor of University of Tsukuba, to discuss policy control of international migration, its limitations and possibilities. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased and honored to have been invited to speak to you today. And this is the title of my presentation. But I specialized in politics, economics, and international political sciences, focusing upon tensions between individuals and the states. Exercising state and state power is by certain actors and authorities, which also governs the migration and also the granting and approving the nationalities. And what kind of the processes do those policymakers, those with authorities, follow? I wondered whether such a process might reflect how the cultures and the people are formed. Concerning this subject matter, I don't have any academic background, but when I was a student more than 20 years ago, I traveled around the world. I experienced how I wondered how I'm allowed so easily to enter, or why I'm being prevented from entering into a certain country at the immigration control checkpoints or offices. But I today focus upon policy control or potentials or limitations of policy control over international migrations. I discuss this based on the rather practical point of view, from practical point of view. First, attention to policy control over international migration. Why on earth the attention is growing to the policy control over international migration? Of course, one background is the increasing pressure for international migration, which of course is already very clear for all of us. And with the international migration, which is growing, what are implications or the ramifications, as indicated here, number 2? What are their impact on international community, nation states, and local societies and economics? Impact through the labor market, and impact on social security programs of host countries, for example, as well as impact on national and local government fiscal situations, as well as impact in terms of culture, languages, and cultural friction can occur with the growing international migration. So it can be politicized, it can become political issues quite easily. Then with the growing pressure for international migration and with the various policy implications, then the states and the host nation authorities, it's not easy for them to control the international immigration despite such growing impact and the pressures. I would say this rather from a subjective point of view, because I quite long ago wrote an article concerning the immigration. And my teacher also said that the history of the immigration and control over immigration is a history of failure. So he, in a way, criticized the relevance of my research. Of course, policy control over international migration has certain limitations. And perhaps because of that, government immigration policies and its performance has been attracting the growing attention, in my opinion. Now, Professor Hugo, a keynote speaker today, is a renowned authority internationally and in Australia. And in Melbourne last year, in February last year, there was an international conference on refugees, and I attended that conference as a part of the audience. And Professor Hugo was a speaker there, and he identified important analysis as to how the refugees and asylum seekers they contributed to their host countries. The the Minister of Australia attended the conference, and the Australia accepted the refugees for its national interest. But what is a national interest? Such discussion was very interesting, but such discussions hasn't been very active at the open fora or at the policy reforming the processes. It was a kind of taboo, but such a taboo must be broken down, because the performance of the immigration policy is in the national interest or not, and what is the national interest. Such discussion, open discussion, is necessary in Japan too. I now skip and go on to the second area, in limitations of international policy. As I said, there is a growing interest in policy control over international migration, but I particularly now pay attention to the limitation of such policy control. International migration. It is possible to control international migration through policy measures? If the answer is yes, under what conditions? Or what aspect of international migration is controllable, or what aspects are outside of the control? I think that is a better the way of expressing my concerns and interests, because as I stated here, I will explain later on what is potential migrants, but there is a complex process from being potential migrants to their settlement and their impact. Because this is quite a complex process, it is not easy to simply characterize this process. And international migration, instead of thinking it as an dependent factor, I think this is the way I grasp this situation. I use the word potential migrants. Or perhaps this can be paraphrased as the pressure for international migration. And international migrants can move across borders and then gradually reach the bottom stage, settlement of migrants. Then on what stage can we control through policy measures? Well, the potential migrants can increase in what direction, this is also shown here, although this is rather complicated, as you can see here with these arrows. The presence of the potential migrants is there, and there can be some policy interventions. But however, it is rather limited, although the policies can exert certain control. So it really depends on how open or how closed immigration policy is, or how effective or how inclusive the various social institutions are of a country. So they are dependent on many of these factors: immigration and the control of residence status of residents, and social inclusiveness, cohesiveness have to be taken into consideration, and these also, I think, play an important role in this process when the migrants come into the country and started the process of settlement. And there is one example of the difficulty of seeing if the effectiveness of the policies. That is the Japanese policy that has been introduced quite recently, as was mentioned previously by the previous speakers. In May last year, the point system was introduced. The target was the 2,000 in the first year, but the actual result was less than 1/4 of the target figure in the first fiscal year. So the performance of this policy was quite limited. And then the policy was to be reviewed in this fiscal year. So perhaps the result of the review will be announced perhaps in next month or so. So I expect that the government will launch more incentives. So please refer to the relevant material if you are interested. What are conditions? I think the conditions can be relaxed, and also there will be more incentives to attract highly skilled foreign workers in Japan. But will it be effective? That should be reviewed later. But based on what we have discussed so far, we need to discuss why have we failed to attract more people, skilled people from outside. I think this is also a very important question, but the Japanese itself is not a global language, and the employment systems and personnel, the practices are difficult to be enjoyed or benefited by foreigners, such as the lifetime employment and seniority systems. And also so far Japanese industry doesn't require so many highly skilled foreign workers. So the potential migrants which meet the Japanese the conditions or the requirement of the industry, there hasn't defined Japan as an attractive place to go in. So not only the policy effectiveness, but also the background and the other factors are very important in explaining the performance so far of the Japanese immigration policies. So this is only one example of the limitation of the policy measures, policy control of. But policy control, the policy is not limited to the policy of attracting highly skilled foreign workers into Japan. The current policies are having impact on various areas. So I would say that the expected result hasn't been produced so far, but before coming to Japan, the residence status and the landing permit and the visa must be obtained, and also the bio ID data have to be given when they arrived in Japan. So there are so many hurdles to clear by foreigners.
Now this is just one example. So let's assume a person has entered into Japan and they stay in Japan and then they go back, they depart from Japan. So a foreigner's residence information is managed, and the foreigner can conduct activities according to his visa. If not, he might be told to go out of Japan. And so depending on examples, the policy does work, or there is a performance as a result of a policy. And in some aspects, foreigners are rigidly managed by the system or the rules. So I have talked about the daily migration control. However, if the receiving country selectively controls migration, or is it possible for a receiving country to control migration effectively? So how will the policy be controlled? Of course, the panel discussion, I will use the panel discussion time to refer to these details. I will not talk about the government-initiated model or market adjustment model, or I will not talk about global governance model. So I refer to, from the perspective of a receiving country, which kind of attribute should a foreigner have, and are those attributes controllable? So this is a table that I compiled before. So controllable or not controllable. So there are elements which are controllable and not controllable, or partly controllable, or some parts not controllable. So I looked at the attributes of the migrant, or I looked at some of the activities and conditions approved in the country. So the blue shows nationality, the level, duration, and the area, region that people are interested in. And international marriage is something that the control does not extend to. So on the right-hand side, I looked at non-discretionary migration. So permanent residents, spouse of Japanese national, regardless of their nationality, they will be admitted to Japan. And also, it's not possible for the government to control these types of migrants. And as long as, let's say for marriage, as long as the marriage continues, the person can stay in Japan, and there's not much restriction posed on these people. They can live anywhere they like. So the X shows that the government of the receiving country cannot control these items. That's what I mean by non-discretionary. The government cannot exercise discretion over these people. Now, on the other hand, the government, in case government can exercise discretion, which are those items? Those are the ones that you see a lot of circle or triangle. So on the top, technical trainee system in Japan, the government can control nationality or the scale, and they can also control to a certain extent, and they can also regulate duration and area of occupation. And people were talking about bringing people to certain region or non-urban region, and I was quite interested about this number 7, initiative by local government. In Australia, RSMS, Regional Sponsored Migration Scheme, I think exists, and in Canada, Provincial Nominee Program exists. So I think Professor Hugo explained about this. If the migrant is going to work in that region, he will get a bonus point, and he will get a qualification to settle in that area. So there are conditions posed on such migration. So this is to invigorate the rural area, and this is a migration policy to reinvigorate such areas. Now, from circle to X, you can see in duration, area, occupation, and region. Originally, there's a condition posed so that the person must stay on the same job and same area for 2 or 3 years. Then he gets the qualification for permanent migration, and also he can move to any other area. So just initial years, there are controls posed. So depending on the situation of a region, government can pose such controls, and the employer can also set up such a condition. So the percentage, if you look at the percentage of such immigration, it's only 10 or 15% of total immigration in Australia and Canada. These countries are immigration countries, so they have lots of immigrants. And in Japan, I go through regional areas and I make a research into foreigners in each region. And the employers say that they want this kind of RSMS or RNP system in Japan. They say it might be one of a realistic policy in Japan. I don't know what is this called, but there is a round table with trainees, but this is just a labor force. These trainees do not lead to permanent migration in Japan. And this kind of policy is not limited to Australia, but in Australia they have a very clear policy. If each region needs some number of immigrants, and then the policy aims to bring in such labor. And so the immigration policy is closely related to economic policy, And so there is a political control and there is high expectations towards immigration policy. And in Japan, it is very difficult to have such discussion politically as well. So I think I have a few more minutes left because I skipped some pages. So today I will be talking about number 3 in the panel discussion about the validity and reality of policy control. A policy, whether it is immigration policy or if it is about receiving certain number of my immigrants in certain region, I think it's important to talk about the validity of such policy. But I think in Japan there exists kind of a atmosphere of taboo to talk about it. If the policy is valid, then the intention of the policy must be realized. But can we design such a policy? And we have to discuss about the reality. So there's a simple question of whether we receive migration and whether can we design a policy that is valid and real. From a researcher's point of view, whether this is practical, I think we are wondering still whether we can demonstrate the effectiveness of such policy. And this forum today, the conference, deals with the international migration towards a Japanese model. And I myself, during the past 3 years or 5 years, I have been thinking about the Japanese model or policy framework that Japan should aim for, and I was involved in giving a policy recommendation. So I had several occasions to think about it, and I've been thinking whether there is a unique Japanese model that's possible. And I've been thinking about it, but I didn't come up with really a good model. But hearing today's presentation from other people, I feel like I'm almost close to a Japanese model, and I might even realize a breakthrough for my research. Thank you very much.
明石先生ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, Professor Akashi. Now this concludes the panelist presentation. And now we'd like to take 15-minute break. From 3:15, we will start the panel discussion. And if you have any questions, please do hand in your questionnaires. And so if you have any questions, please fill in the questionnaire paper. And if you are watching a Ustream, please do send your question to this email, seminar@ipss.go.jp. During the break, please do keep your interpretation receiver